Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric, this being a show where I talk about crime dramas. For this episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Blindspot. In this episode, we have Jane still working with that organization, specifically that guy, who's apparently his name's Oscar. Have I been missing this entire time, or was this episode the first time his name's ever come up? Because I've always never known his name, but maybe it's come up before and I was just totally blanking on it. Basically, the big part in this episode was there was a theft at an art exhibit, and there was one painting stolen. There was multiple high value art pieces there, but there was one particular art piece that was stolen, and it was basically a painting of the exact rose that's on Jane's body. Basically, the whole thing was a trap to get Jane there, and during the trap, a bomb in a statue went off, and it ended up sending shrapnel into Kurt's neck, and he was bleeding like crazy. Basically, he had to have surgery and all this stuff, and they were able to track, because essentially everyone was thinking it's got to be the artist behind it. He has to be the one that targeted Jane. They end up going to his place and finding him dead. He was basically tortured, but before they could really examine things, Jane takes 2 bullets to the chest, ends up falling down. Turns out, like I said, everything was mainly to get Jane. This was when it was clear Jane was the target, not just the FBI in general, specifically Jane. The guy that's going after him, because Jane went to Oscar to ask him about it, because Jane kind of went renegade because she didn't want to be around her team, because she remembered the guy's face, that he was someone she knew from her past. So she didn't want the team to get caught up in this, so she kind of goes off on her own. And Oscar explains that this guy's name is Cade. He's actually a founding member of the group that they're a part of, but he kind of went rogue because I think he said sometime around the time Jane joined the FBI, because he just said oh, this was all because he just didn't want her to become the enemy, that they're no better than, because if she joins up the FBI, that makes them no better than the people, the bad guys they're fighting or something like that. They're no longer the good guys in that regard. We have Kurt, who, was still in the hospital, but he gets up, because he finds out that Jane's kind of going off on her own. He knows what Jane's doing, that she's trying to protect them. So he's like, we got to find Jane, and he's doing everything he can, even though he's still a little messed up. He was literally in the hospital maybe a couple hours. And he ended up, taking himself out because he's like, we have to go, help Jane. And there was a moment where Oscar's like, okay, we are going to have to be the ones to take down Cade. And so, him and Jane temporarily join up together, and they end up meeting another member, someone that Jane also remembers. His name is Danny. Danny helps him out a little bit. There's even a moment where Jane is kind of smiling, which is kind of between, Oscar and Danny talking, she kind of smiles. And it's kind of interesting. I guess, a little bit of her, who she was, she's kind of she kind of sees him in a different light. Because this entire time, she's always looked at Oscar as someone she can't trust. And to see, him and Danny kind of talk like this, I guess it fills her with a little bit of nostalgia in her heart, whether she'll realize it or not. But she sees that, she sees them in a different way. Sadly, Danny ended up dying. He ended up saying it was him, paying Jane back, he owed her. So, because basically Cade had tortured another member of the group to find out where they were. That's how he found out they were with Danny. And basically, the group was able to track this guy down. They were able to track Cade down, but ended up kind of getting locked up. And Jane herself decided, Oscar was telling her just to run. That, they'll deal with Cade, but she has to run. But she's basically like, I can't abandon my team. Because basically he was saying, have her leave the FBI, deal with the Cade situation, and then find some way to put her back into the FBI. But she's like, no, I can't leave my team. And besides, if I disappear, right now it's going to be harder to explain what I've been up to and stuff like that, why I ran and everything. So she decides that she's going to go help her team, especially when she finds out that they're in trouble, because basically Cade had let it leak that he had the FBI locked up, and the reason obviously he let that leak is because it was meant to be a trap. And Jane knew it, but she was like, I still have to go. But Oscar's still telling her they're not your friends, they're not your allies. But she still goes anyway and ends up getting there. It's very interesting how Kurt ends up opening that door. Basically, he used a gun. I mean, he shot a hole in like a very thin, hollow part of the door. They pumped gas into it, used a rag, and basically shot it and blew it up. That was kind of like quick thinking on him. I like how he just MacGyvered that crap together. But Jane kind of goes up against Cade. And basically it comes out the reason why Cade really hates Jane, he's coming after Jane, is because of Oscar. Basically, I might be remembering this incorrectly, but essentially Oscar went on a mission with Cade's, I think was it his brother, but his brother ended up dying in the mission, and Cade blames Oscar for it, which Oscar admitted to Jane's like, yeah, it was my fault. So this whole thing was him getting back, he's like basically getting back at Jane. Getting back at Oscar by taking the person that Oscar cares for the most, which is Jane. What's interesting enough was like something we kind of saw in an earlier episode, which Jane had kind of never really seen, is just actually how much he actually cares about her. Because he was like, after Danny died, he's like, no, we have to get away from this because it's a dangerous situation. You could easily end up dying because going up against someone like Cade. And he was like, we can't lose you. I can't lose you. And Jane kind of sees firsthand, just how real his feelings for her are. But anyway, they end up getting into a struggle, Jane and Cade, and, Cade gets the upper hand, and Oscar shoots him. And then he hears the FBI, Kurt and his team coming, so he grabs Cade, and they both fall into the water, and Jane, ends up kind of explaining the situation back at, headquarters that, she basically essentially lies her way around the situation. Mayfair herself isn't too convinced about it, but she's asking Reed, because Reed has always been suspicious of Jane. He kind of brought it up before, but essentially he had gotten visited by that mystery guy, at the beginning of the one that knocked him out last episode. Basically, he was warned not to investigate the whole Tom situation anymore if he wants to make sure that Sarah, Kurt's sister, as well as her child, are kept safe. So they were being threatened some, and because of that, he went to Mayfair saying like, no, I was wrong about Jane, and now he's doubling down on it, even though he is super suspicious of Jane because he's like, it's too much of a coincidence. So he knows, he has a feeling that she's connected to all this. He just doesn't know how. He wants to keep an eye on her, but he doesn't really get his opportunity to like he wants to. We even have Reed breaking up with Sarah because he doesn't want to put her in danger anymore. So he basically being a little harsh and telling her like, I don't love you. Because he kind of had it in his head earlier because she said I love you, but he didn't say I love you too. Which, in his head, it already shown that he was that far ahead in thinking like, I have to end this. So it's fine with breaking her heart and making her hate him if it means keeping her alive. Because if he distances himself from her, he won't have to worry about her being used against him. I guess in his mind, he's like, okay, if we're no longer together, then I don't have to necessarily worry about her safety because she won't be in danger with me around. We also have, Jane meeting up with Oscar again because she, at the end of the episode, she was actually worried about him. You can actually see it, and he's like, huh. She runs over and she actually hugs him. He's like, huh, you almost look like you're happy to see me. But basically, she doesn't want him lying to her anymore. She wants to know what's really going on. He's like, you basically don't have to worry about it. Cade is dead, which at the end of the episode we see Cade is not. Which makes me think either he really believes Cade is dead, or they're secretly working together that this whole thing was a plot, maybe to get Jane to trust them a little bit more. In my opinion, maybe that's what this whole thing was, because sacrifices have to be made, right? Maybe even Danny dying was part of the plan. I don't know. Maybe that's me reading too much into it. It'd be interesting if that was the case, though, because maybe he just assumed. But it could just be easily that he does think that Cade's dead because he just assumed with a gunshot wound and not being able to find his body that obviously he just kind of got swept away. Which I don't know. Because of this whole thing, she has become at least a little bit more trusting of Oscar. So if he was actually lying to her about this whole situation, that could be where that's leading towards. Or, like I said, could be reading too much into it. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.